Welcome. Tonight, we are not entering a tale meant to convince or impress. We are stepping into something older, quieter, and far more persistent. The dragon does not arrive as a creature to be explained, but as a presence that has followed human thought for as long as humans have tried to understand the world around them. Long before dragons were drawn, named, or filmed, they were already there, forming slowly in the background of human awareness. Across continents and centuries, people imagined something remarkably similar. Not identical in shape or temperament, but unmistakable in role. A vast being older than memory, tied to places humans approached with caution. Mountains, deep waters, burning deserts, dark forests. Dragons appeared wherever the world felt too large to be negotiated directly. This repetition is not coincidence, it is pattern. Human beings, regardless of language or geography, respond to certain stimuli in similar ways. Height triggers vertigo. Fire demands respect. Darkness sharpens imagination. Predators imprint fear deeply and quickly. Dragons gather these responses into a single, durable form, one that can be carried across generations without losing meaning. In early societies, danger was not abstract. It had teeth, weight, speed, and silence. A single misjudgment could end a life. The mind learned to exaggerate threats because exaggeration increased survival. Over time, these exaggerated impressions began to merge. The sharp gaze of a predator, the coiled movement of a snake, the overwhelming scale of a storm, the finality of fire. Dragons were not designed. They condensed naturally. Even before writing, humans marked what frightened them. Cave paintings show overlapping jaws, elongated bodies, and eyes larger than proportion requires. These images are not literal animals. They are emphasis. They highlight what mattered most to remember. Dragons emerge from this emphasis, not from imagination alone. As spoken stories formed, dragons took on narrative weight. They were no longer just dangers. They became boundaries. A dragon marked the end of safe land, the limit of certainty. Beyond it, things changed. Time behaved differently. Rules no longer applied in familiar ways. To pass a dragon was to accept transformation. Early myths rarely describe dragons in detail. They are felt more than seen. A land becomes barren. A river becomes impassable. A path remains blocked for generations. The dragon is implied by consequence. This vagueness allows the creature to expand and contract depending on need. It can represent famine one year, an invasion the next. In ancient Near Eastern traditions, dragon-like beings were often tied to chaos itself. Flood myths describe massive serpentine forces rising from the deep, undoing order without malice or intent. These creatures were not evil. They were inevitable. Humanity's struggle was not to defeat them, but to survive their passing. As civilizations grew more complex, dragons adapted rather than disappeared. They entered written language as metaphors, guardians, and tests. In Northern European epics, the dragon becomes solitary and territorial. In Beowulf, the dragon does not roam. It waits. Its anger is not random. It is triggered when a long-sealed boundary is violated. A single stolen object awakens destruction. This detail is revealing. The dragon reacts not to humanity's existence, but to imbalance. Something taken prematurely, something touched without understanding. The dragon punishes disruption, not curiosity itself. It enforces a quiet rule. Some knowledge demands cost. Fire enters the dragon myth for similar reasons. Fire is the most transformative force humans ever controlled, and the most dangerous when control is lost. By giving dragons fire, stories assign them ultimate authority over change. Fire clears land. Fire purifies. Fire ends life. A dragon's breath becomes irreversible decision. Yet fire is not universal. In many traditions, dragons are creatures of water. They coil through rivers, sleep beneath lakes, or rise with storms. Water dragons do not burn. They overwhelm. They arrive silently and reshape landscapes. Floods, droughts, and shifting currents all become intelligible when given a will. This difference is cultural, but the function remains constant. Dragons regulate forces humans depend on, but cannot command. Whether flame or rain, the dragon stands between desire and consequence. As mapping and exploration expanded, dragons moved to the edges of knowledge. Medieval maps famously depicted dragons and other creatures in unexplored regions. These images were not intended as literal warnings. They were acknowledgments of uncertainty. The dragon became a visual shorthand for "we do not know what is here." Importantly, these dragons are often calm. They do not attack ships or cities. They simply exist. Their presence marks humility. Even as humanity charted the world, it admitted that something remained beyond comprehension. Dragons also appeared in architecture, carved into stone at the entrances of sacred spaces. Cathedrals, temples, and bridges were guarded by dragon forms not to terrify, but to signal transition. Passing beneath a dragon meant leaving one state of mind and entering another. The creature marked the threshold. In literature, dragons matured alongside narrative complexity. They developed personalities, memory, and speech. In The Hobbit, Smaug is not a simple obstacle. He is perceptive, articulate, and acutely aware of his own symbolic power. He understands fear and uses it deliberately. Smaug's relationship with his horde is particularly telling. He does not need the treasure to survive. He guards it because possession itself defines him. This mirrors human behavior more than animal instinct. The dragon becomes a reflection, exaggerated enough to reveal uncomfortable truths. Eastern traditions offer a different but equally sophisticated interpretation. Chinese dragons are long, fluid, and intimately connected to natural cycles. They bring rain, shape rivers, and govern seasons. Their bodies resemble clouds more than flesh. They move through the sky as if it were water. Despite these contrasts, dragons everywhere share one trait: age. They are ancient beyond measure. Even newly encountered dragons are described as old. This age grants authority. Dragons do not rush. They observe. They remember landscapes before humans altered them. Their patience is often more unsettling than their aggression. A dragon that waits implies inevitability. When it finally moves, the outcome feels deserved rather than surprising. As storytelling mediums evolved, dragons transitioned seamlessly. In modern cinema, they gained physical realism without losing symbolic weight. Films like How to Train Your Dragon reimagined dragons as misunderstood intelligences rather than monsters. Fear became a communication failure rather than a moral divide. This reinterpretation reflects contemporary values. Modern audiences are less interested in conquest and more concerned with coexistence. Dragons shift accordingly. They become companions, mirrors, and sometimes victims of human ambition. Even darker portrayals follow this pattern. In Game of Thrones, dragons are not villains. They are weapons, symbols of legitimacy, and reminders that absolute power destabilizes everything around it. Their destruction is rarely intentional. It is collateral, born of misuse. Psychologically, dragons function as archetypes. They compress multiple emotional responses into one form. Fear, desire, reverence, and caution coexist without conflict. A dragon can be beautiful and terrifying simultaneously because those emotions often arise together in real life. Biologically, dragons combine the most threatening features humans evolved to notice quickly: the forward-facing eyes of predators, the elongated bodies of snakes, the scale of large mammals, the vertical dominance of birds. This combination triggers instinct before logic intervenes. This may explain why dragons feel convincing even when anatomically impossible. They bypass rational critique. The brain recognizes danger patterns long before it questions physics. Dragons are also almost always solitary. They do not travel in herds or flocks. This isolation reinforces their singularity. A dragon is never background. Its presence alters everything around it. Encounters are rare, deliberate, and consequential. Silence plays a crucial role. Dragons are often heard before they are seen, or seen without sound at all. Their presence changes air, light, and behavior. Animals flee. Landscapes feel charged. These environmental shifts signal danger without immediate action. Across history, dragons changed roles but never relevance. When survival dominated, they embodied natural disaster. When morality shaped stories, they tested virtue. When empires rose, they symbolized authority. When technology advanced, they questioned control. The consistency lies not in appearance, but in function. Dragons mark thresholds. They stand where certainty ends and choice begins. They occupy the space between knowledge and consequence. This is why dragons persist. As long as humans face uncertainty, the shape remains useful. It adapts to new fears and new hopes, but it never disappears. It waits. And as this exploration continues, the dragon will not be treated as a single creature, but as a pattern that survived geography, religion, art, and time. A pattern that learned how to remain relevant without demanding attention, quietly, patiently, and always at the edge of what we think we understand. Dragons also persist because they solve a narrative problem humans never outgrew: how to represent scale. Mountains can be climbed, storms eventually pass, oceans can be crossed. Dragons combine all of these into a single mobile presence. They move like weather, occupy space like geography, and react like living beings. This allows stories to give form to forces that are otherwise too vast to personalize. In many traditions, dragons are tied to specific places rather than events. They do not chase, they reside. A mountain becomes known because a dragon lives there. A lake gains meaning because something ancient sleeps beneath it. This attachment to location transforms geography into memory. The land is no longer neutral. It remembers what happened there, even if people do not. Dragons are also frequently associated with thresholds of maturity. In myths and literature, encountering a dragon often coincides with a shift in responsibility or awareness. The hero who faces a dragon does not return unchanged, regardless of outcome. This pattern mirrors psychological development. Fear must be approached, not avoided, for growth to occur. Unlike many mythical creatures, dragons are rarely tricksters. They do not deceive for amusement. When they speak plainly. When they act, their actions are final. This consistency gives dragons moral weight. They are not chaotic minds. They are stable forces. Humans, by contrast, are impulsive. The imbalance between these two behaviors drives much of the tension in dragon stories. Another subtle but persistent trait is the dragon's relationship with time. Dragons sleep for decades or centuries without urgency. Their sense of duration does not align with human lifespans. This temporal distance reinforces their authority. Decisions made slowly feel heavier, more considered, and therefore more dangerous when opposed. In art and sculpture, dragons are often frozen mid-motion rather than fully at rest or attack. Wings partially extended, jaws slightly open, bodies coiled but not striking. This suspended state reflects how dragons function symbolically. They represent potential rather than action. What matters is not what the dragon is doing, but what it could do. Modern interpretations continue this logic even when dragons are reimagined through technology or science. Some contemporary stories explain dragons as engineered beings, ancient species, or lost evolutionary branches. These explanations do not weaken the myth. They simply translate it into the language of the era, preserving the underlying function while changing the surface logic. Dragons endure because they refuse to be simplified. They cannot exist purely as good or evil without losing their weight. Even the most benevolent dragon remains dangerous, and even the most destructive one carries a sense of dignity. Across cultures, they are often placed beside knowledge rather than land-guarding scrolls, sacred spaces, or forbidden truths, quietly suggesting that some understanding carries risk and cannot be taken lightly. In this way, dragons are never final answers, but living questions, shaped to explore how much power can be held responsibly, how far curiosity should go, and what consequences follow when boundaries are crossed without awareness. Before dragons learned to fly, they learned how to wait. The earliest dragons were not creatures of the sky, but of the ground, the water, and the unseen spaces beneath human feet. They did not arrive with thunder or flame. They arrived quietly, already present in places people avoided long before they understood why. In these early forms, the dragon was less a beast and more a condition, something that existed wherever certainty dissolved. The first dragons did not chase, they occupied. A river bend that claimed animals without warning. A marsh that swallowed travelers whole. A cave whose depth could not be measured by torchlight. These were not imagined dangers, they were lived ones. When people began to describe them, the language naturally reached for shape. The danger became something with a body, because bodies can be remembered. Reptiles played a crucial role in this transformation. Large snakes, crocodiles, and monitor lizards were among the most efficient predators early humans encountered. They moved without sound, struck without warning, and often remained unseen until it was too late. The human nervous system adapted to notice these shapes quickly and react before conscious thought intervened. Dragons inherited this response. The elongated body became central. Length suggests persistence. A long creature cannot be grasped all at once. It must be followed with the eye. This creates unease. Early dragon descriptions emphasize bodies that coil, stretch, and disappear into darkness. The dragon is never fully visible. Something always remains hidden. Water amplified this effect. Rivers and lakes conceal movement, distort sound, and hide scale. Something large moving beneath the surface leaves only ripples, never certainty. Many early dragon myths describe creatures that live entirely underwater, surfacing only when boundaries are crossed. The dragon becomes a guardian of depth, enforcing respect for what cannot be seen. In ancient stories from multiple regions, dragons are associated with blocked water. A river stops flowing. A spring dries up. A lake becomes hostile. The dragon is blamed not because it caused the change, but because it explains it. When rain patterns shifted or floods arrived unexpectedly, attributing intention brought emotional order to environmental chaos. Fossils added another layer. Long before paleontology existed, humans encountered massive bones embedded in stone. Skulls too large to belong to any known animal. Spines that stretched far beyond familiar anatomy. Without context, these remains demanded explanation. Dragons offered one that fit scale and fear simultaneously. In regions where dinosaur fossils were common, dragon myths often emphasize size and age. These dragons are ancient beyond memory, sleeping beneath the earth for millennia. They are not born. They are uncovered. This reflects the experience of finding bones that appear to belong to a time before people themselves. Notably, these early dragons rarely breathe fire. Fire is a later addition, tied to metallurgy, warfare, and symbolic purification. The first dragons kill through presence alone. They poison land, block passage, or simply make survival impossible. Their power is environmental rather than aggressive. The idea of poison is especially important. Many early dragons are toxic. Their breath corrupts water. Their blood ruins soil. This mirrors real experiences with contaminated environments stagnant water, and disease. The dragon becomes a living explanation for invisible danger. Another recurring trait is stillness. Early dragons move slowly or not at all. They are patient. A creature that does not need to hurry feels invincible. Humans, bound by hunger and fatigue, project this limitation onto dragons by removing it entirely. The dragon can wait longer than any person. This patience changes the nature of fear. A fast predator is frightening, but predictable. A waiting predator alters behavior permanently. People avoid entire regions rather than reacting moment by moment. Dragons enforce long-term caution. In many myths, the dragon is discovered rather than confronted. A village exists peacefully until someone realizes what lives nearby. The revelation itself becomes the threat. Knowledge changes behavior even before action occurs. This pattern reinforces the dragon's role as a boundary marker rather than an attacker. As storytelling matured, these ground-bound dragons began to accumulate traits. Horns, crests, scales thicker than armor. Each addition reflects an escalation of threat. Armor negates weapons. Height negates reach. Weight negates resistance. Dragons are built to invalidate human advantages one by one. The absence of wings in these early forms is telling. Flight implies freedom and dominance over space. Early dragons do not need this. They control territory through inevitability, not pursuit. Their power is local but absolute. In some traditions, these dragons are almost indistinguishable from the land itself. Mountains are said to be sleeping dragons. Earthquakes are interpreted as their movement. This blurring of creature and environment reinforces the idea that dragons are not invaders of nature, but expressions of it. Serpentine imagery dominates because it resists symmetry. A snake does not present a clear front or back. Direction becomes ambiguous. Early dragon art often exaggerates this by removing limbs entirely. The creature becomes pure motion without structure. This lack of structure mirrors early human uncertainty about the world. Before maps and measurement, space itself was unstable. Paths changed, rivers shifted, land disappeared underwater. Dragons gave this instability a face. Importantly, early dragons are rarely described emotionally. They are not angry, cruel, or vengeful. Those traits appear later. Initially, dragons simply are. Their danger does not require motivation. This neutrality makes them more unsettling. There is nothing to negotiate with. As societies developed moral frameworks, dragons slowly absorbed judgment. But in their earliest forms, they exist outside ethics. They do not punish or reward. They enforce reality. This is why early dragon encounters often end without victory. The dragon is not slain. It is avoided, appeased, or contained. Rituals emerge to keep it dormant. Offerings are made not to gain favor, but to maintain distance. These rituals reveal another truth. Early dragons are not meant to be conquered. They are meant to be lived around. Communities adapt rather than attack. This survival strategy reflects real relationships with dangerous environments. Over time, these adaptations become stories. Stories become myths. Myths become symbols. But the foundation remains the same. The dragon began as a way to understand persistent, unavoidable danger. As language evolved, names for these creatures varied, but descriptions remained consistent. Large, old, hidden, patient, dangerous without effort. The dragon is defined not by action, but by consequence. This emphasis on consequence explains why early dragons are often solitary. A single source of danger is easier to track. Multiple dragons would dilute responsibility. One dragon can be watched, respected, and remembered. As trade routes expanded, dragon stories traveled with them, adapting quietly to new landscapes without losing their core purpose. In one region, the dragon lived in water. In another, it hid within caves, and elsewhere, it slept beneath sand and stone. The setting changed, but the function remained the same, to mark places where certainty weakened. Over time, as human concerns evolved, new elements were layered onto the dragon. Metalworking introduced fear of extreme heat, cities introduced fear of destruction from above, and gradually fire and flight became natural extensions of the same ancient idea. Yet beneath these later additions, the original dragon never disappeared. The ground-bound, water-linked, fossil-born presence still lingers beneath every winged depiction and every burst of flame. This dragon does not roar or announce itself. It waits patiently, shaping behavior long before it acts. Even in the most elaborate modern portrayals, that first dragon remains coiled beneath the story, quietly reminding us that fear did not begin with fantasy, but with reality itself. As humans learned to control their surroundings more effectively, the dragon began to change shape again. Once land could be cleared and water redirected, danger no longer felt entirely horizontal. It started to come from above. Fire spreading across rooftops, smoke rising beyond control, and enemies approaching from elevated ground altered how fear was imagined. The dragon responded by lifting itself from the earth. Wings did not appear because dragons needed to fly, but because humans needed danger to move freely across space. Flight removed the last illusion of safety. Walls no longer protected, distance no longer mattered. A winged dragon made every place reachable, every settlement vulnerable. This was a psychological shift rather than a biological one. Fire followed soon after. Unlike water or poison, fire transforms instantly. It does not wait. As societies began forging metal and building dense cities, fire became the most terrifying force imaginable. Giving dragons fire meant assigning them mastery over irreversible change. A fire-breathing dragon represents the moment when damage cannot be undone. These additions did not replace earlier traits. They layered on top of them. The patience remained. The age remained. The territorial instinct remained. What changed was expression. The dragon no longer merely blocked paths. It could erase them. It no longer waited beneath the land. It could arrive from the sky. Interestingly, even as dragons became more powerful, they also became more defined. Horns, scales, and wings followed recognizable patterns. This suggests an attempt to categorize fear, to make it legible. A defined enemy feels more manageable than an undefined one, even if it is stronger. With this definition came personality. Dragons began to speak, reason, and judge. Speech made them mirrors rather than forces. A talking dragon reflects human logic back at the listener, often exposing flaws. This shift marks a transition from environmental fear to moral confrontation. Yet dragons never fully became human. Their logic remained slow, their values alien. Time still meant something different to them. This gap preserved their otherness. A dragon could understand humanity without belonging to it, which made its judgments feel heavier. As myths spread through writing and art, dragons became increasingly symbolic. They stood for empires, for forbidden knowledge, for power held too tightly. Still, they retained their origin as boundary markers. Wherever a story needed a limit, a dragon appeared. In many narratives, the dragon's defeat does not end danger. It transfers it. Power taken from a dragon often destabilizes the world. This reinforces an important idea. Removing a boundary does not remove risk. It simply redistributes it. Modern interpretations continue to explore this tension. Dragons are allies, weapons, or endangered beings, but rarely simple monsters. Their complexity reflects modern uncertainty about power and control. The dragon now asks not whether it should be faced, but whether it should be used. Through all these transformations, the dragon remains anchored to its earliest role. It is still a response to forces humans cannot fully command. Whether sleeping beneath stone or circling the sky, The dragon persists as a reminder that some dangers do not vanish when named. They only change form. In the East, the dragon was never something humanity needed to overcome. It existed long before confrontation became a useful story structure. The dragon was already there, embedded in the movement of water, the rhythm of seasons, and the slow intelligence of the land itself. Rather than standing opposite humanity, it surrounded it, shaped it, and quietly corrected it when balance was lost. This difference begins with perception. In many Eastern traditions, danger is not imagined as an enemy approaching from outside, but as imbalance growing within a system. When something goes wrong, the question is not who attacked, but what shifted. The dragon becomes visible not through violence, but through change. Rain arrives too early. Rivers rise too high. Crops fail to mature. These signals are read not as random misfortune, but as communication. Water lies at the center of this worldview. Long before political borders or written law, water determined survival. Fields depended on rain. Cities grew along rivers. Trade followed currents. To influence water was to influence life itself. It is no coincidence that Eastern dragons almost always emerge from lakes, seas, clouds, or deep river bends. They do not control water as a weapon. They regulate it as a living system. Unlike fire, which announces itself immediately, water builds quietly. It gathers pressure, shifts weight, and transforms landscapes without spectacle. Eastern dragons inherit this temperament. They are not creatures of sudden destruction. They are creatures of gradual consequence. When they move, the world adjusts rather than collapses. This understanding is deeply visible in Chinese mythology through the figure of the dragon kings. Each dragon king governs a sea or major body of water, not as a ruler demanding obedience, but as a custodian maintaining equilibrium. Storms and droughts are not expressions of rage. They are signs that balance has been disturbed somewhere within the larger order. This framing removes moral judgment from natural disaster. The dragon does not punish humanity. It responds to conditions humanity helped create. Responsibility is distributed rather than imposed. The dragon does not stand above nature. It is the point where nature becomes aware of itself. The physical form of the Eastern dragon reflects this philosophy with remarkable consistency. Long, flexible, and serpentine, it resembles water in motion more than any land animal. Its body curves continuously, without sharp angles or abrupt stops. There is no clear beginning or end. This endless form suggests continuity rather than domination. The lack of wings is especially revealing. Eastern dragons do not fly by force. They rise because the world allows them to. Their movement through the sky is described as swimming rather than soaring, as if the air itself has density. Flight becomes a result of harmony, not conquest. This idea subtly reshapes how power is understood. Strength does not come from resistance alone. It comes from alignment. When conditions are right, movement is effortless. When they are not, even the dragon withdraws. Power is contextual, not absolute. In imperial China, the dragon became the symbol of the emperor, but this symbolism carried a heavy burden. The emperor was believed to stand between heaven and earth, responsible for maintaining cosmic balance. Natural disasters were interpreted not as failures of the dragon, but as signs that the ruler had lost alignment with the order he was meant to protect. This made the dragon a symbol of responsibility rather than entitlement. To wear the dragon was not to claim supremacy, but to accept obligation. Harmony sustained authority. Corruption weakened it. The dragon's favor was never guaranteed. Architecture reinforces this role quietly. Dragons appear carved into roofs, columns, and thresholds. They are placed where transitions occur between inside and outside, ground and sky, sacred and ordinary space. They do not guard against enemies. They guard against disorder. In Eastern art, The dragon's expression is calm. Its mouth is often closed. Its teeth are present but understated. The gaze is outward, observant rather than aggressive. The dragon is aware, not hunting. It watches systems rather than individuals. Silence is essential to this image. Eastern dragons rarely speak. When they do, their words are brief and indirect. Knowledge is not delivered through explanation. It is revealed through consequence. The dragon shapes circumstances, so understanding emerges naturally. This silence preserves scale. Speech would reduce the dragon to a character. Silence allows it to remain a force. The dragon does not need to persuade. Reality speaks on its behalf. Korean traditions add a particularly grounded dimension to this worldview. In older beliefs, the sea itself was ruled by a dragon king. This was not abstract symbolism. It was an assumption woven into daily life. Fishermen believed their livelihood depended on the disposition of this unseen presence. Before long fishing seasons, rituals were performed to honor the dragon king of the sea. These rituals were not expressions of fear, but of respect. The goal was not to beg for favor, but to acknowledge relationship. A successful catch was interpreted as harmony restored between human action and the greater order governing the ocean. When fish were scarce, the response was not immediate blame or anger. It was reflection. Something had shifted. The dragon had not turned hostile. It had withdrawn cooperation. This interpretation encouraged restraint, patience, and adjustment rather than confrontation. This Korean sea dragon is especially revealing because it connects the dragon directly to survival rather than heroism. The dragon is not encountered in exceptional moments. It is present in routine labor, in waiting, in uncertainty. It belongs to rhythm, not spectacle. This integration of the dragon into ordinary life is one of the most important distinctions between Eastern and Western traditions. Dragons are not reserved for climactic battles. They exist continuously, regulating conditions whether humans are paying attention or not. Age plays a stabilizing role here as well. Eastern dragons are ancient, but their age is not threatening. It represents memory. The dragon remembers how the world behaves when left undisturbed. It holds a reference point that outlasts generations. Because of this, humans do not question dragons directly. They observe signs, rainfall patterns, wind direction, harvest outcomes. The dragon communicates through systems rather than speech, reinforcing humility and attentiveness. In art and poetry, dragons are often paired with clouds. Clouds are neither solid nor empty. They shift, dissolve, and return. They exist between states. The dragon inhabits this same space, connecting sky and water, heaven and earth, seen and unseen. This in-between quality allows the dragon to act as a bridge rather than a barrier. It does not block passage. It regulates flow. It ensures transitions occur at the right time. Eastern dragons are also rarely solitary in the Western sense. They exist within systems. Families of dragon kings, cycles of seasons, hierarchies of natural forces. Even when depicted alone, they are understood as part of a larger order. This collective framing changes how danger is perceived. Threat does not come from an isolated creature, but from imbalance across the whole. The dragon does not cause destruction alone. It reflects it. As a result, Eastern dragon stories rarely center on victory. Resolution is quiet. Balance returns. Water flows again. Life continues. The tension lies not in combat, but in waiting. Will harmony be restored, or will imbalance persist? Even when Eastern dragons display force, it is restrained. Floods devastate landscapes, but they are not framed as personal attacks. They are consequences unfolding over time. This framing encourages respect rather than hatred. Even when Eastern dragons display force, it is restrained. Floods devastate landscapes, but they are not framed as personal attacks. They are consequences unfolding over time. This framing encourages respect rather than hatred. Across centuries, Eastern dragons adapted to new philosophies and artistic styles without losing their core role. They appeared in scrolls, ceramics, temple carvings, poetry, and later literature. Each depiction refined the same idea: power without aggression, authority without domination. In modern East Asian culture, dragons continue to symbolize luck, prosperity, and continuity. These associations are not arbitrary. They emerge naturally from the dragon's role as a regulator of life-sustaining forces. Even today, dragon festivals emphasize coordination and rhythm. Multiple people operate a single dragon body. Movement depends on collective timing rather than individual strength. The symbolism is clear without explanation. Through all these transformations, the Eastern dragon remains fundamentally different from its Western counterpart. It does not exist to be defeated. It exists to be understood, respected, and lived alongside. This difference reflects a worldview in which humanity is not separate from nature, but embedded within it. The dragon becomes the visible shape of that relationship. And in this understanding, the dragon does not roar. It does not challenge. It flows. As Eastern societies evolved, the dragon's role became even more abstract, moving further away from physical form and closer to principle. In later philosophical traditions, especially those shaped by Taoist and Confucian thought, the dragon no longer needed to appear at all to be understood. It became a way of explaining why restraint mattered, why excess invited collapse, and why patience often produced better outcomes than force. This philosophical dragon rarely occupies the center of a story. Instead, it shapes the edges. It explains why a wise ruler waits instead of acting, why silence can be more effective than command, and why intervention must be timed rather than constant. The dragon here is not an actor, but a reference point against which correct behavior is measured. Another important shift occurs in how the dragon relates to humanity itself. Rather than standing above humans as an unreachable force, Eastern traditions often place the dragon on a parallel level. Humans are not insignificant. They are simply not central. The dragon does not exist to serve people, but neither does it exist to oppose them. Both occupy the same system, bound by the same rules. This perspective changes how responsibility is distributed. When disaster strikes, the question is not how to defeat the dragon, but how human behavior contributed to imbalance. The dragon becomes a mirror rather than a judge. It reflects conditions honestly, without intention to comfort or accuse. Over time, this idea influenced storytelling structure. Eastern narratives involving dragons tend to lack climactic confrontation. There is no final blow, no decisive victory. Resolution comes through adjustment. A ritual is corrected. A ruler steps back. A community alters its behavior. The dragon recedes not because it is beaten, but because harmony no longer requires its presence. Even when dragons appear directly, they often do so briefly. A glimpse through clouds, a movement beneath water, a shape implied by weather. This partial visibility reinforces the idea that complete understanding is neither possible nor necessary. The dragon does not need to be fully seen to be effective. In some later interpretations, the dragon becomes a symbol of potential rather than current power. It represents what could happen if balance collapses, rather than what is happening now. This transforms the dragon into a preventative presence. Its existence encourages careful action without requiring constant intervention. This preventative role explains why dragons in Eastern thought are often associated with wisdom rather than strength. Wisdom here is not accumulated knowledge, but sensitivity to timing and proportion. Knowing when not to act becomes as important as knowing how. As these ideas spread, the dragon's image softened without weakening. Decorative dragons in art and ceremony retained their symbolic weight even as their forms became more stylized. The dragon could be playful in appearance while remaining serious in meaning. Power no longer needed intimidation to be respected. In modern contexts, this legacy persists subtly. The dragon continues to symbolize continuity, prosperity, and balance, not because it promises reward, but because it reminds people of interdependence. Success is framed as alignment rather than conquest, flow rather than domination. Through this evolution, the Eastern dragon completes its transformation from creature to concept. It no longer needs a body, a voice, or a lair. Its presence is felt whenever restraint prevails over excess and harmony is valued over control. The dragon remains, not as something to face, but as something to remain in step with. In the West, the dragon did not regulate the world. It tested it. Where Eastern traditions placed the dragon within the flow of nature, Western stories positioned it at the edge of order. The dragon became something that blocked progress, guarded forbidden space, and demanded confrontation. It did not quietly correct imbalance. It forced a decision: advance, retreat, or be destroyed. This difference did not emerge suddenly. It formed slowly, shaped by geography, theology, and social structure. Western landscapes were harsher, more fragmented, and often defined by scarcity rather than abundance. Survival required clearing land, defending territory, and securing resources. In such an environment, danger was framed less as imbalance and more as opposition. The Western dragon embodies this opposition perfectly. It occupies space that humans want but cannot safely claim. A mountain pass, a cave rich with minerals, a border between settlements. The dragon does not merely exist there, it prevents passage. Its role is to say no. Fire becomes central in this context. Unlike water, fire is immediate and destructive. It does not negotiate. In medieval Europe, fire meant loss without recovery. A single blaze could erase generations of labor. By giving dragons fire, Western stories transform them into agents of irreversible consequence. Western dragons are also profoundly solitary. They do not belong to systems or cycles. They exist outside community. This isolation mirrors the way threats were perceived, as singular catastrophes rather than systemic shifts. A dragon appears, and everything changes. In many early Western myths, the dragon is tied to greed, but not always its own. It hoards treasure not because it values gold, but because humans do. The dragon becomes a mirror for unchecked desire. It sits atop wealth that brings no benefit while denying access to others. This idea reaches one of its clearest expressions in Beowulf. The dragon in this story is old, alone, and largely inactive until disturbed. Its rage is not spontaneous. It is triggered by theft. Something taken awakens destruction. Here, the dragon enforces a boundary. The hoard was untouched for generations. Removing a single object breaks an unspoken rule. The dragon's retaliation is devastating, not because it is cruel, but because balance has been violated. This framing is important. The dragon is not evil by default. It becomes catastrophic when humans overstep. Yet the story still demands confrontation. Avoidance is no longer possible once the boundary is crossed. Unlike Eastern dragons, Western dragons speak rarely, and when they do, their speech is often deceptive or confrontational. Language becomes another weapon. Words distract, provoke, or test resolve. Silence here is less common. The dragon engages. The idea of the dragon as a moral adversary intensifies with the spread of Christianity. Dragons become associated with sin, temptation, and chaos. They are placed opposite saints and heroes, not merely as physical threats, but as spiritual ones. The legend of St. George exemplifies this transformation. The dragon terrorizes a community, demanding sacrifice. Order is restored only through its defeat. The message is clear. Evil must be confronted directly and eliminated. In this context, the dragon is no longer part of the world's balance. It is a corruption within it. Its destruction is framed as restoration. Violence becomes cleansing. Medieval bestiaries reinforce this view by cataloging dragons alongside other dangerous creatures, assigning them moral symbolism. The dragon's fire becomes hellish. Its lair becomes a place of temptation and decay. Its wings blot out light. These descriptions do more than entertain. They teach. The dragon becomes a lesson about what happens when power exists without restraint or guidance. It must be destroyed because it cannot be integrated. Western dragons are often positioned above the world rather than within it. They appear on mountain peaks, ruined towers, or high cliffs, places where height itself becomes a statement of dominance. Elevation here is not harmony or perspective, but threat. The dragon looks down upon humanity, not to observe, but to assert superiority and force submission through fear. This vertical presence stands in sharp contrast to the flowing movement of Eastern dragons. The Western dragon does not merge with its surroundings. It imposes itself upon them. Where it lives, the land feels wounded rather than shaped. Its lair is not part of the landscape. It scars it. Another recurring element is the dragon's relationship with the hero. In Western storytelling, the dragon is not incidental. It defines the journey itself. Without the dragon, there is no proof of worth, no validation of courage or strength. The encounter becomes a rite of passage that separates the untested from the proven. Victory over a dragon is rarely simple or clean. It demands sacrifice, loss, and irreversible change. Even when the dragon is slain, something valuable has gone: lives, innocence, stability. This reinforces a core idea. Confronting immense danger always carries a cost. Triumph is never without consequence. In many stories, the dragon guards not only treasure, but knowledge. Scrolls, secrets, or sacred truths lie within its domain. To reach them, one must face destruction. Knowledge is not framed as purely enlightening, but as dangerous, heavy, and potentially corrupting. This framing aligns with a broader Western anxiety about overreaching. Curiosity is encouraged, but only within limits. Beyond those limits, punishment awaits. The dragon enforces containment, standing as a warning against going too far, knowing too much, or taking what has not been earned. As these stories spread and solidified, the dragon's image became increasingly defined. Thick scales resist weapons. Massive wings darken the sky. Fire cannot be extinguished. Each trait systematically removes a human advantage, forcing heroes to rely on ingenuity rather than strength alone. This escalation reflects a deeper concern. What happens when human tools fail? The dragon exists beyond conventional solutions. It cannot be reasoned with easily, wounded casually, or avoided indefinitely. It forces a choice between adaptation and surrender. Importantly, Western dragons are rarely negotiated with. They do not participate in balance or compromise. They impose dominance. Dialogue, when it exists, is deceptive or dangerous. The narrative offers only one resolution: confrontation. This framing sharpens emotional response. Fear transforms into resolve. The dragon must be faced because leaving it alive threatens everything else. Compromise feels like weakness. Delay feels like collapse. Over time, this structure hardened into expectation. A Western dragon story without conflict feels unfinished. The narrative demands opposition because opposition validates order. Without confrontation, stability cannot be restored. Even in later literature, where dragons gain intelligence, speech, or personality, this structure remains intact. They may reason, manipulate, or negotiate briefly, but they still stand opposed to human progress. Their role as obstacle is never fully removed. In Western storytelling, the dragon functions as a final test of resolve. Action defines virtue, hesitation signals failure, and the dragon's survival feels incompatible with order. This is why Western dragons are so often slain. Their existence demands resolution, yet they are rarely mindless threats. Many awaken only when boundaries are crossed, becoming both the cause of destruction and a response to imbalance. As these stories evolved, the dragon's role remained largely unchanged. From myth to modern movies, it came to represent power that cannot be safely controlled. Western dragons do not withdraw or adapt. They must be confronted. Their end marks a permanent shift, reminding audiences that some forces can only be answered, not negotiated with. As Western thought matured, the dragon gradually absorbed the weight of collective anxiety. It no longer represented only physical danger, but the fear of collapse itself. Empires rose and fell, cities expanded, and systems grew more complex. With this complexity came fragility. The dragon became the shape given to everything that could undo progress in a single moment. This shift is visible in how dragons began to mirror human ambition. They grew larger as kingdoms grew richer. Their hordes expanded alongside economies. The dragon did not simply guard treasure, it reflected excess. Gold piled without purpose, watched over by a creature that could not use it, echoed the fear that wealth itself could become destructive when detached from meaning. Over time, dragons also became increasingly tied to isolation. Western dragons withdraw from society completely, settling in ruins, caves, or desolate peaks. This separation reinforces the idea that unchecked power inevitably distances itself from humanity. The dragon does not rule among people. It rules apart from them. Literature deepened this separation by giving dragons intellect without empathy. They reason, calculate, can predict, yet remain unmoved by consequence. This combination is unsettling. Intelligence without connection becomes dangerous. The dragon embodies knowledge divorced from responsibility. In later medieval and early modern stories, the dragon's defeat often restores order temporarily, but never permanently. Peace follows, yet it feels fragile. This narrative choice quietly suggests that eliminating one threat does not remove the conditions that created it. Another dragon may rise elsewhere, in another form. As science and rationalism advanced, dragons did not disappear. Instead, they retreated into symbolism. They became metaphors rather than creatures. Volcanoes, plagues, and later machines inherited the dragon's role. The language of fear shifted, but the structure remained intact. In modern Western fantasy and cinema, dragons often return with renewed complexity. They are no longer purely evil, yet they remain dangerous. Their destruction is questioned, but their existence still demands response. Power is no longer automatically condemned, but it is never trusted. This hesitation reflects a changing relationship with authority. Modern audiences increasingly recognize that not all power can be destroyed without consequence, and that eliminating a dominant force often creates a vacuum rather than resolution. Dragons, in this context, become dilemmas instead of simple obstacles. They represent systems, technologies, or authorities that are dangerous, yet foundational. The question subtly shifts from how do we defeat it to what happens after it is gone, and sometimes even what survives because it exists. This shift adds moral weight to the dragon's presence. Destruction is no longer framed as a clean solution, but as a choice with long shadows. The dragon's fall may end one threat while unleashing others, and stories begin to acknowledge this uncertainty without fully resolving it. Power is questioned, not glorified, but neither is it dismissed as purely corrupt. Yet even within this ambiguity, the Western dragon retains its defining role. It forces a decision. Ignoring it is never presented as an option. Whether approached with weapons, strategy, restraint, or uneasy alliance, the dragon demands response. It concentrates uncertainty into a single presence that cannot be bypassed. In Western storytelling, progress remains impossible until that confrontation, whatever form it takes, has occurred, and an answer, costly or incomplete, has been given. There was a moment in history when the dragon stopped living only in stories and began to appear on paper. Not as a character, not as an enemy, but as a mark. A sign placed carefully at the edges of what was known. When humans began to draw the world, they also began to draw what they did not understand, and the dragon quietly took its place there. Early maps were not instruments of precision. They were instruments of confidence. They showed what could be named, traveled, and returned from. Everything beyond that required a different language. Mountains became exaggerated. Oceans stretched wider than experience allowed. And in the spaces where certainty failed, images appeared. Serpents, sea monsters, dragons. The phrase often associated with these maps, "Here be dragons," was never meant as a literal warning of a creature waiting to attack. It was an admission. This is where knowledge ends. Beyond this point, the rules may not apply. The dragon became a visual punctuation mark, signaling the boundary between experience and imagination. What is striking is how calm these dragons often appear. They are not depicted mid-attack. They do not devour ships or cities. They rest, coil, or simply exist. Their presence does not say danger ahead as much as it says certainty stops here. The dragon is not threatening the viewer. It is informing them. As cartography developed, dragons migrated slowly but deliberately. They clung to coastlines, unknown seas, and unexplored interiors. The more land became charted, the more dragons were pushed outward. They retreated with ignorance, not with disbelief. This movement alone reveals their function. Dragons did not disappear when people stopped believing in them. They disappeared when people stopped needing them to explain the unknown. This same logic carried into art. Medieval manuscripts are filled with dragons that do not belong to any narrative. They appear in margins, borders, and decorative initials. These dragons are not characters. They are atmosphere. They create a sense of otherness around sacred or important text, reminding the reader that meaning itself has edges. In illuminated manuscripts, dragons often twist around letters, biting their own tails, or intertwining with vines. This visual language blurs the line between organic growth and threat. The dragon becomes part of the structure, holding the text together. Knowledge is framed by something ancient, powerful, and not entirely safe. Architecture adopts the dragon in a similar way. Stone dragons carved into cathedrals and bridges rarely appear in positions of attack. They perch, crouch, or gaze outward. Their placement is deliberate. Entrances, corners, roof lines. Transitional spaces. The dragon does not block entry. It marks passage. Gargoyles and dragon figures serve a dual purpose. They are functional, channeling water away from stone, and symbolic, embodying forces kept outside sacred space. The dragon is placed at the edge, not within. It absorbs what should not enter. It stands watch without intervening. Over time, the dragon's form in art becomes more refined. Early depictions are abstract, almost chaotic. Later ones gain anatomy, texture, and personality. This progression mirrors humanity's changing relationship with fear. What was once overwhelming becomes examinable. What can be drawn can be studied. What can be studied feels less absolute. Renaissance artists continue this process. Dragons become more dramatic, more muscular, more expressive. They are now central figures rather than marginal ones. Yet even here, their role remains symbolic. They are painted not because they exist, but because they mean something specific to the viewer. In religious art, dragons often appear beneath saints or heroes, crushed underfoot or pierced by spears. This imagery simplifies the dragon's role, turning it into a representation of sin or chaos. But the dragon's persistence in these images suggests unresolved tension. It must be shown again and again because it never fully leaves. Heraldry offers another transformation. Dragons appear on banners, shields, and crests. Here, they are no longer warnings. They are emblems. To claim a dragon is to claim strength, vigilance, and the willingness to confront danger. The dragon becomes identity rather than threat. This shift is subtle but important. When a symbol moves from margin to center, from warning to emblem, it changes meaning. The dragon is no longer only what lies beyond. It becomes something one carries. As printing spreads, dragons enter popular imagery. Woodcuts, engravings, and later illustrations circulate dragon forms widely. They become standardized. Wings curve in familiar ways. Heads take recognizable shapes. The unknown becomes repeatable. Repeatability tames fear. When an image can be copied, it loses singularity. Dragons become part of visual vocabulary rather than interruptions within it. They still represent danger, but a danger that can be anticipated. In modern times, this visual lineage continues seamlessly into illustration and movie design. Dragons on screen borrow heavily from medieval art, Renaissance anatomy, and mythic exaggeration. Even the most advanced digital dragons echo hand-drawn ancestors. What changes is not the dragon's role, but the viewer's position. We no longer encounter dragons at the edge of knowledge. We encounter them within controlled narratives. The dragon is framed, lit, and scored. It exists inside a boundary we trust. Yet even now, dragons retain their original placement instinctively. They appear at borders, between worlds, at the edge of civilization, in ruined places. On maps of imagined worlds, dragons still mark what has not been fully understood. This continuity suggests that the dragon's visual role is not tied to belief, but to cognition. Humans still need a way to see uncertainty. We still draw it, even if the medium changes. In concept art and illustration, dragons often appear where world building requires depth. They add age instantly. A dragon implies a history longer than any character's lifespan. It suggests that the world existed before the story began. This is why dragons remain effective visual shorthand. They compress time, danger, and mystery into a single form. A viewer does not need explanation. The dragon communicates silently. Across centuries, styles change, tools evolve, and meanings shift, but the pattern holds. Dragons appear where explanation fails. They sit at the edges of maps, texts, buildings, and now screens. Not because people expect them to be real, but because uncertainty still needs a shape. The dragon survives in visual culture because it solves a problem no other symbol quite manages. It makes the unknown visible without pretending to understand it. It allows fear to be acknowledged without being named. And in that role, the dragon no longer needs to move. It simply needs to be seen. As visual culture matured, dragons began to appear not only at the edges of maps and manuscripts, but within the act of looking itself. Painters started to use dragons to guide the eye across a composition, placing their curved bodies along diagonal lines that pulled attention from foreground to background. The dragon became a tool of visual movement, quietly teaching viewers how to read an image. In late medieval and early Renaissance works, dragons often anchor scenes of scale. A single dragon placed beneath towering architecture or vast landscapes instantly communicates proportion. Without explanation, the viewer understands size, distance, and risk. The dragon functions as a measuring device for the world it inhabits. Printmaking accelerated this effect. As engravings and woodcuts spread across Europe, dragon imagery became familiar even to those who had never read the associated stories. Repetition stripped away shock, but increased recognition. The dragon became part of shared visual literacy, a symbol understood across regions without translation. This familiarity allowed artists to experiment. Some dragons became grotesque exaggerated almost to humor. Others grew elegant, elongated, and ornamental. The creature could now shift tone without losing meaning. Fear was no longer the only emotion it carried. Curiosity and admiration entered quietly. This familiarity allowed us to experiment more freely with the dragon's form. Some dragons became grotesque, their proportions exaggerated almost to the point of dark humor, while others grew increasingly elegant, elongated, and ornamental. The creature proved flexible enough to shift tone without losing symbolic weight. Fear was no longer the only emotion it carried. Curiosity, fascination, and even admiration began to enter quietly alongside it. Cartographers, too, refined their dragons as knowledge expanded. As coastlines became more accurate and navigation improved, dragons retreated from familiar shores into deeper oceans and polar regions. Their placement grew intentional rather than speculative. A dragon was no longer a rough guess about danger. It became a clear statement that this region resisted certainty, not because it was empty, but because it remained beyond reliable understanding. In this way, dragons gradually came to represent epistemological limits rather than physical threat. They marked the boundary of trustworthy knowledge. Even when explorers no longer believed in literal sea monsters, the symbol retained its usefulness. The dragon communicated a simple truth that language struggled to express. We do not know enough yet, and caution still applies. Architecture followed a similar evolution. Dragons carved into stone slowly lost anatomical realism while gaining decorative complexity. Sharp claws softened into curves, and aggressive forms dissolved into repeating patterns. The dragon's body became rhythm rather than menace, flowing across facades and surfaces like a visual echo of older fears transformed into structure. This decorative transformation did not weaken the symbol. It refined it. The dragon no longer needed to frighten in order to signify power. Instead, it suggested continuity, protection, and long memory. Buildings carried dragons the way cultures carried warnings, subtly, persistently, and without constant explanation. As visual storytelling expanded into illustration and later movie design, dragons inherited centuries of accumulated imagery. Concept artists rarely invent dragons from nothing. Consciously or not, they draw from manuscripts, heraldry, sculpture, and ancient maps. Even the most modern dragon carries medieval posture in its spine and antique logic in its silhouette. This inheritance explains why dragons feel ancient, even in futuristic or fantastical settings. Their visual grammar predates the medium in which they appear. Wings curve in familiar arcs, scales catch light in expected ways, and proportions feel immediately believable. These choices feel intuitive because they have been rehearsed across centuries of imagery. In imagined worlds, dragons often appear not at the center of cities, but just beyond them. They occupy ruins, cliffs, distant skies, or forgotten valleys. This placement mirrors their cartographic origins. Even in fictional worlds, dragons continue to mark thresholds, signaling the edge between safety and uncertainty. Illustrated atlases of imaginary realms frequently reintroduce dragons along borders, echoing medieval maps without explicitly referencing them. The symbol persists because it communicates uncertainty with remarkable efficiency. A single dragon conveys more than a paragraph of exposition ever could. As audiences became more visually literate, dragons were no longer needed to explain danger itself. Instead, they began to explain depth. A dragon implies a past conflicts that shaped the land, eras that ended long ago, rules that once governed the world. Its presence suggests that the present moment rests atop many layers of time. This temporal compression is one of the dragon's most powerful visual traits. A single image can imply centuries of history. Viewers sense age and continuity without being told. The dragon carries memory not through words, but through posture, scale, and stillness. Even minimalist representations preserve this effect. A silhouette crossing the sky, a shadow sliding over stone, a distant shape barely defined. The dragon does not require detail to function. Recognition is immediate because the symbol is already complete in the viewer's mind. Modern visual culture has refined the dragon into a symbol of precision rather than excess. Dragons no longer need long appearances or constant movement. Their power lies in placement. A brief silhouette, a distant shadow, or a hinted presence is enough to leave a lasting impression. Across centuries of art, maps, architecture, and now screens and pages, the dragon's role has remained remarkably stable. It occupies spaces that draw attention while resisting full explanation. It frames worlds without resolving them, making uncertainty visible without trying to control it. The dragon's visual evolution is not about becoming more realistic, but about learning exactly where to stand, how much to reveal, and when to remain silent, asking not to be believed, but simply to be noticed at the edge of what we think we understand. Dragons did not disappear when the world became mapped. They did not vanish when science offered explanations, or when myth lost its authority as truth. Instead, dragons did something far more subtle. They adapted. They moved quietly from the margins of belief into the structures of meaning that modern life still struggles to explain. The disappearance of dragons was expected. As technology advanced, as knowledge expanded, as the unknown retreated, the dragons seemed destined to fade. Yet the opposite happened. Dragons became more visible, more complex, and more persistent than ever. This persistence reveals something essential. Dragons were never sustained by belief alone. They were sustained by need. In earlier eras, dragons explained nature. Storms, floods, fire, darkness. When these forces became measurable, dragons did not lose relevance. They changed function. They began to represent forces humans created themselves, but could not fully control. Power shifted inward. Modern life introduced dangers that were not external, but systemic. Industrialization, rapid expansion, centralized authority, and accelerating knowledge created new forms of uncertainty. These were not threats that could be hunted or avoided. They were embedded in progress itself. Dragons became the language through which this discomfort could be expressed. In literature and movie narratives of the modern era, dragons rarely appear as random monsters. They are tied to systems, empires, technologies, inherited power, or ancient agreements. Their presence signals imbalance within structures humans rely on. Destroying the dragon often destabilizes the very world that summoned it. This shift reframes the dragon entirely. It is no longer simply an obstacle. It is a consequence, something that emerges when scale exceeds responsibility. The dragon is not the problem. It is the evidence. One of the most important changes in modern dragon narratives is the loss of moral simplicity. Dragons are no longer purely evil. They are dangerous, yes, but often justified. They guard, preserve, or enforce rules humans themselves abandoned. This ambiguity reflects a growing awareness that power itself is not inherently corrupt, but always risky. In many modern stories, dragons are ancient not because they are old creatures, but because they embody long-term consequences. They remember promises broken generations ago. They enforce costs delayed far beyond a single lifetime. This temporal distance mirrors real-world systems whose effects unfold slowly. Climate change, political structures, technological dependency. Dragons become custodians of time. They hold memory when human institutions forget. This role transforms them from enemies into uncomfortable witnesses. Facing a dragon becomes an act of confronting accumulated consequence rather than immediate threat. Another notable shift is the dragon's relationship to ownership. Earlier dragons hoarded treasure without use. Modern dragons are often bound to resources essential for survival: energy, knowledge, territory, or balance. Their hoards are not indulgent. They are structural. Taking from them disrupts systems rather than enriching individuals. This reframing changes the emotional stakes. Killing the dragon may solve one problem while creating many others. Stories increasingly explore this tension without resolving it cleanly. Victory feels incomplete. Loss lingers. Modern dragons are also less isolated. They exist within networks, alliances, ecosystems, political arrangements. Their removal has ripple effects. This reflects contemporary understanding of interconnectedness. Nothing exists alone. Every force influences others. As a result, dragons are no longer always confronted directly. They are negotiated with, studied, contained, or reluctantly tolerated. These approaches mirror real-world responses to overwhelming systems. Control replaces conquest. Even when dragons are opposed, the opposition feels cautious. Heroes hesitate. Decisions carry visible weight. The story acknowledges that force is not neutral. Action reshapes the world permanently. This hesitation marks a significant cultural shift. Earlier narratives celebrated decisive destruction. Modern ones question it. The dragon forces audiences to consider not just whether something can be destroyed, but whether it should be. Dragons also become mirrors for technological anxiety. Artificial intelligence, nuclear power, genetic manipulation. These forces share dragon-like qualities. They are created by humans, grow beyond individual control, and promise both protection and catastrophe. Dragons provide a symbolic container for these contradictions. Importantly, dragons in modern narratives are often self-aware. They understand their role. Some resent it. Others accept it as necessary. This self-awareness deepens their symbolism. The dragon knows it is feared, yet remains indispensable. This creates a new kind of tension, not between hero and monster, but between dependence and distrust. The dragon cannot be fully embraced or fully eliminated. It must be managed. In visual storytelling, this complexity is reflected in design. Modern dragons often appear less grotesque and more grounded. Their movements are slower, their expressions more restrained. Power is communicated through presence rather than aggression. Silence returns as a defining trait. Modern dragons often speak little. When they do, their words are deliberate. They do not justify themselves. They state conditions. This echoes earlier Eastern traditions while maintaining Western confrontation. The dragon's environment also changes. It no longer lives only in remote caves. It inhabits ruins of past civilizations, remnants of collapsed systems. These settings reinforce the idea that dragons emerge where structures failed. In many narratives, dragons are bound by rules that predate humanity itself. These rules are not laws written by people, but balances embedded in the world. Contracts, oaths, and ancient limits exist whether humans remember them or not. When these boundaries are broken, consequences follow naturally, without negotiation. The dragon does not invent punishment. It enforces what already exists. This enforcement role is deeply unsettling because it removes intention from the equation. It suggests that some limits operate regardless of belief, morality, or justification. Dragons become guardians of boundaries modern society prefers not to acknowledge, reminding characters and audiences that not everything can be redefined or bypassed. As dragons take on this role, heroes change as well. Triumph becomes heavier. Success carries responsibility instead of relief. Choices feel irreversible, and victory no longer restores innocence. Encounters with dragons leave marks that do not fade once the conflict ends. Even in stories where dragons stand alongside humans, tension never fully disappears. Trust remains conditional. Power is shared carefully, often reluctantly. Alliances exist not because harmony has been achieved, but because alternatives are worse. Cooperation becomes a strategy, not a resolution. This tone resonates strongly with contemporary audiences. The world no longer feels divided into clear threats and clear solutions. Problems overlap, consequences multiply, and certainty feels fragile. Dragons fit naturally into this landscape of ambiguity. In this sense, dragons have become more necessary, not less. As systems grow more abstract and invisible, symbols must carry greater weight. Dragons are capable of holding contradictions without collapsing under them. They can be protectors and threats at the same time. They can preserve balance while enforcing destruction. They can justify action and demand restraint. Very few symbols operate comfortably across such opposing roles. The endurance of dragons also reflects something deeply human. People continue to seek figures that stand at the edge of understanding. Even when explanations exist, emotional comprehension often lags behind. Dragons bridge that gap. They allow fear to be acknowledged without triggering panic. They allow power to be questioned without causing paralysis. They make complexity narratively accessible without oversimplifying it. In this way, dragons are no longer remnants of a primitive worldview, but tools for navigating a complex one. They slow narratives down in a world that accelerates endlessly, forcing pause, reflection, and attention to consequence. When dragons appear today, they do not signal a return to myth, but continuity, the same human concerns reshaped for a different era. The dragon did not survive because people refused to let it go, but because it continues to do essential work holding uncertainty, power, and fear in a single adaptable form, quietly present as long as wisdom struggles to keep pace with what humans create. The future of dragons does not depend on new stories inventing them again. It depends on whether uncertainty continues to exist. As long as humanity faces forces that feel larger than individual understanding, the dragon will remain a useful shape. Its form may change, but its function does not need to. In emerging narratives, dragons are increasingly less physical and more conceptual. They appear as systems rather than creatures, as invisible pressures rather than visible threats. The dragon might never be seen directly, yet its influence shapes every decision. This reflects a world where danger is rarely singular or obvious, but distributed and persistent. Technology plays a significant role in this transformation. Advanced systems promise efficiency, safety, and progress, yet they also introduce scale beyond human intuition. Like dragons, they are created with intention but grow beyond easy control. Stories use dragon logic to explore this tension without naming it directly. In these narratives, the dragon is no longer always confronted with force. Sometimes it is monitored, limited, or contained. The emphasis shifts from victory to management. This change mirrors real-world responses to power structures that cannot simply be dismantled without collapse. Dragons also begin to represent responsibility passed between generations. They outlive individual characters, reminding audiences that consequences do not end when a story does. The dragon waits while people change, underscoring the idea that some problems persist regardless of who is in charge. Visually, future dragons are often less dramatic and more restrained. Their presence is suggested through scale, sound, or absence rather than spectacle. This restraint aligns with their role as background forces shaping outcomes rather than foreground threats demanding attention. Narratively, dragons increasingly challenge certainty rather than bravery. The question is no longer whether someone is strong enough to face the dragon, but whether they understand what the dragon represents. Misunderstanding becomes more dangerous than fear. This shift allows dragons to coexist with humanity without resolution. Stories end without slaying, banishment, or triumph. Instead, they close on negotiation, balance, or uneasy acceptance. The dragon remains not defeated, but acknowledged. As audiences grow accustomed to complexity, dragons become symbols of systems that require humility. They cannot be mastered completely. They can only be approached with caution, awareness, and long-term thinking. This reinforces a quieter, more reflective narrative pace. In this future, dragons are less likely to appear as singular villains and more likely to function as environments. They are the conditions within which choices are made. Removing them would not solve the problem. It would erase the context. This is why dragons continue to feel relevant even as the world changes rapidly. They adapt because they are not tied to any single era's fears. They translate fear itself into form, regardless of what shape that fear takes. And so the dragon's future is not extinction, but refinement. It becomes subtler in form, slower in movement, and more patient in presence. This is not because humanity has outgrown the dragon, but because the questions it carries have become more layered and difficult to resolve. Power no longer appears as a single threat that can be faced and defeated. It unfolds across systems, generations, and unintended consequences. The dragon adapts to this complexity by receding slightly from view, existing less as a spectacle and more as a condition. As long as uncertainty persists, as long as wisdom struggles to keep pace with what humans create, the dragon will remain quietly present, shaping the edges of stories that are still unfolding and reminding us that not every force is meant to be ended, only understood well enough to live alongside.